Number 1. Shed. I was out hiking one day, just trying to explore and have a good time. It was what I did in my spare time because I wasn't much of an indoor guy. I almost sometimes wonder if most people know how much is out there that is yet to explore. I was always able to find a new place to go around looking for things. My family lived out in the middle of the country. There was a lot of property around that area and very few houses. So I could go out in search of things all the time and always find something new. It was fall when I was out exploring, and thus it was a little chilly that day. It was also overcast with clouds, dark and moving quickly in the sky. Still, there was no indication of rain, and I wasn't worried about possibly getting wet. I had gone further out than I had ever gone before. I had to be careful because there were electric fences out there and some barbed wire ones as well. The brush was very thick, so thick in places that I hadn't noticed the fences before and found myself shocked or stuck with the barbs. This was no exception because how thick the vegetation was in some places. I had seen some old structures out in the hills and had even come across a barn that was likely still being used in a clearing. Those were my favorite things to see when I was out exploring. I always liked to wonder when they were in use and what they were in use for. This time I had been out for quite a while. The weather that I described was my favorite kind of weather, so I wasn't about to head home early. I wanted to remain out in it. I suddenly heard a really strange noise. It wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. I was quite certain that it was an animal, but not any animal that I had ever heard before. It was just some really inhuman sort of wail. There weren't supposed to be any dangerous animals out in the hills that I lived in, or so my parents told me, so I wanted to check it out. I began walking in the direction of the noise that I heard. I heard it a few more times, so I was able to know that I was going in the right direction. I kept following the noise. I began thinking that it had to be some sort of animal in distress. Maybe it was caught up in a barbed wire fence, or some sort of animal trap. If so, I definitely wanted to be able to help it. However, as I got closer to where the sound was coming from, I noticed what looked like an old shed up ahead of me. It was obviously very old, and probably left over from people who previously owned and worked on this land. It wasn't very big, and I was surprised that it was still holding together after how shabby it looked. I heard the wail one more time. There was no doubt about it at this point. Whatever was making that noise was inside that shed. I almost stopped and turned the other way. I didn't want to be that regretful guy from a scary movie who came upon something he wishes that he hadn't. But I was way too curious to find out what was making that noise. I got closer and closer to the shed. As I did, I noticed that there was a glassless window in the door of the shed. It was probably no bigger than a soup bowl. I figured then that I could get a good look into the shed before I opened the door. That way, if it was a dangerous animal, I wouldn't have to open the door and get hurt. As I got closer to the shed, though, I accidentally kicked a rock in front of me. The rock flew up and out and hit the door of the shed. I winced, but I didn't think anything about it. It had just made a strange knocking sound, and that was all. However, when I got close up to the door, I stopped. I had been looking at the little window as I was approaching it, and now I saw what was clearly an eyeball in the window looking back at me. I froze. I heard some really scary mumbling from inside the shed. It was like someone was talking to himself, but although I could tell it was human, I could not tell what that person was saying. But then the door opened, and a face peeped out of the doorframe. I only was able to see the top half of the face, but it wasn't like any human I had ever seen before. It was pale, bald, and had the scariest eyes I'd ever seen before. In a strained voice, I was finally able to make out what it was saying. It told me calmly first to get away, and when I immediately didn't do as it requested, it began screaming at me, "Get away! Get away! Get away!" Terrified at the sound of the voice, I then broke away from it and began running. I didn't want the thing to come after me, even though if it was human, it seemed like it would be very weak. But its voice had been scary and shrill, enough to cause me to panic and run. There was no telling how I would react if I'd seen the full person. I got quite far away before I slowed down, and then I was quite worried about what I had seen. It haunted me until I got home, and every now and then, when I was out in the woods, it haunted me even further. Strangely enough, there were times where my curiosity had gotten the best of me, and I attempted to go back and find the shed again. I wondered if whomever had been inside it was still there, but I was never able to find it again. Part of me was relieved at this, I have to admit. Number 2. Letters. I never used to get much mail when I was younger and still living at home. I didn't send out for things or have any pen pals or the like. Of course I was a kid, so I didn't have any bills in my name, so I didn't get those either. So whenever I did get something in the mail, it was a pretty big deal. And there was a period of time when I got several things in the mail, and it was quite a terrifying time in my life. I was 17 when this happened. I was a senior in high school, and I was an only child. Both of my parents worked, and I would always get home from school before they got home from work. I would usually get a few hours to myself before they arrived. The mail came while I was at school, so I would always get to it before my parents did. One day, I went through the mail and noticed that there was a letter to me in the mail. Like I mentioned, this was not the sort of thing I was used to, and therefore had no idea what it was. When I opened the envelope up, there was a single folded sheet of paper inside of it. I unfolded it, and was surprised to find it completely blank. There was no return address on the letter, and therefore I had absolutely no idea who had sent it. It was weird, and a little bit unnerving as well. Still, it wasn't a big deal, so I put it out of my mind until my parents got home. Then I showed them the empty letter, and they were a bit surprised too. But like me, they didn't think it was anything to worry about. Perhaps someone had written me a letter and had folded up the wrong sheet of paper and put it in the envelope. I think it was probably a week later that I got another letter in the mail. It wasn't too long after the first one arrived. When I opened up this one, I was relieved that it actually had some writing on it. But the content was not what I was expecting. The letter read something to the point of, "I enjoyed seeing you at school today. I didn't know that you walked home from school. Maybe I'll give you a ride home someday." Okay, that was very different than the first one I had received, but it was still very confusing. Like before, it wasn't signed, and there was no return address for it. I assumed it was the same author of the first letter, though. When I told my parents about it this time, they gave me a little ribbing for it. They thought that I had a secret admirer from school. They tried to drill me to see if I could think of who it might have been, but I really had no idea. I wouldn't have thought it would be any of my friends because they knew that I walked home from school. This time, I thought more about it than I had before, although I was just more curious if it might have been someone I knew or not. Over the next few weeks, I would get the occasional letter in the mail from that person. It would always be just a couple of lines mentioning something that happened in school. There was one where they congratulated me for running the fastest mile in gym class. That didn't narrow it down, though, because the gym classes were huge. But I did start looking around in gym class, trying to see if someone was watching me. After receiving several of these letters in the mail, it began to lose its charm, though. I began to get more weirded out than anything else. All of the letters would be mentioning things from my daily school life, and it began to get a bit creepy. This person was obviously paying a whole lot of attention to me, and I began feeling their eyes on me all the time. In short, the letters were beginning to feel stalkerish, and were making me feel quite paranoid. It all came to a head one day, however, when I came home from school. There was a package laid on the porch this time. It was really small, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from the person who had been sending me the letters. This was the very first package, though. When I opened it, there was no letter inside it. All that was inside it was one of those Ginsu knives that were popular back in the 90s. And it looked like it had dried blood on it. I mean, it was red, and I assumed it was blood, not knowing what else it could be. I made the choice to not tell my parents about it. I didn't want to worry them. I was paranoid enough concerning what was going on. I didn't need to make it worse for them. I didn't get anything else in the mail until the following week. When I did, it was another package. I dreaded opening it up because of what had been in the last one. But finally, my curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The smell was horrendous, but there was a plastic container inside the package, and in the container was a dead and decaying bird. There was a letter inside it too, which read, "Guess why the knife I sent you was bloody?" Well, this time I had to tell my parents. They of course called the police, and we had to fill out a police report. But since there was no way of telling who had sent it to me, there wasn't much they could do about it. If I was paranoid before, I went through a long period of time just being scared. I was scared at school. I was scared when I was walking home from school. And I was scared until my parents got home from work. I didn't feel safe until then. I was paranoid also, waiting for another letter or package to come in the mail. Every day on the walk home from school, I would dread it. I never did get anything else in the mail from this person, though. I also never figured out who it was. This was back in the 90s, and I still have never heard from the person again, and don't have any idea who it could have been. Number 3. Mustang. In my teen years, I had always wanted a car. The thing is, although my family wasn't broke by any means, they couldn't afford to get me a car. Plus, we lived in a rural area where there was no place for me to get a job. My parents worked a lot, so they didn't have the time or the free schedule to get me to and from work. So having a decent car really wasn't in the cards. However, my dad and I both enjoyed working on cars, so we bought a really old Mustang that wasn't running, and we spent a lot of time working on it. It definitely needed a whole lot of work done, but when it was done, I would have a car to get around with. My parents were away for a week visiting relatives. I didn't want to go with them because I wanted to spend time getting my car working. I felt I was getting close to getting it finished, and I would finally have my own transportation. One evening I was working really late into the evening, and I finally got the car to start. I was so excited by this that I decided I would take it for a little drive. There were only hills and gravel roads around me, so I didn't have to worry about running into anyone. I felt like I could drive around as much as I wanted to. I drove all throughout the hills, just thrilled to have a working vehicle. I wasn't planning on going anywhere, just driving around and enjoying myself. It was getting dark before I first headed out, and it was definitely dark for the majority of the time that I was driving around. When I was going on a road that I had never been on before, the worst possible thing happened. The car died on me. I had all my tools in the car, so I tried to figure out what was wrong with it. I was positive that I could fix it. What I came to discover was that the fuel gauge was broken, and I'd run out of gas. Since there was no way I could fix that, I would have to walk my way back home and return with a gas can. The only issue was that I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me to get home. I knew I could find my way. It's not like those roads were branched off many times if ever. Only problems were that it was dark, and I wasn't sure how far away it was. So I was fortunate to have a flashlight with me. But it wasn't an extremely strong flashlight, so it was still sort of scary. After I had been walking for a while, I began hearing noises out in the woods. I thought that it was probably an animal or something walking out there, so I tried to put it out of my mind. But I kept hearing it while I was walking, and began wondering what was making those footfalls. So I shined my flashlight out there, hoping to get a glimpse of what it was. I wasn't able to even see a shadow or anything. I kept trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, and I guess I really thought it was. Your mind can play tricks on you, and when you are walking a dark and lonely road in the middle of the night, it's probably only natural to think that a person might be following you. Well, this went on for quite some time. I don't know exactly how long the walk took me to get home, but the entire way there, I was hearing that noise. Occasionally, it would get a little quiet for a short period of time, only to pick back up again. I tried not to let it bother me, but the entire walk home, I was scared out of my mind. I finally got home, and it was well past midnight when I did. Even if it hadn't been, there was no way that I was going to go back to the car until it was light out. I decided to take myself a shower and then go to bed. I had to go into the basement in order to get some clean clothes from the laundry. The basement had two entryways. One was from inside the house, and the other was from outside the house. It was an underground basement, but a small stairwell was built into the ground that led you there from outside. As I went down to the laundry machines, I had to try and find the chain to pull and turn the light on. I found it and turned on the light. I was facing the doorway leading outside when I switched the light on. The moment the light came on, I saw something moving out behind the door in the stairwell. I immediately saw that it was a man, standing in the well, looking like he was trying to break into the house. Fortunately, the door was locked, and it was a pretty heavy door. I guess the guy looked at me when he noticed the light coming on. Our eyes locked for just a moment before the guy ran up the stairs and out of the stairwell. I ran up the stairs as quickly as I could and made sure that all the doors were locked, and so were all the windows in the house. They were, fortunately. I then went into my parents' room and got my dad's gun out of the closet. I took the gun into my room and locked my bedroom door. I was terrified and thought that it was the best place for me to be in case the man broke into the house. Still, I waited for a while, and I didn't hear anything that indicated that he had broken in. After a really long period of time, I eventually fell asleep. The gun remained on my nightstand over the night. In the morning, I was woke up by the sun. I felt much better with the sun out, and I searched through the house to see if anyone had broken in. No one had. That day I took a gas can and my bicycle back to get my car. I half expected it to not be there, but it was. I put the gas in and quickly drove it home. I didn't tell my parents what had happened, though. It would just make them worry, and they probably wouldn't let me go out driving after that. I never found out who it was that had followed me home and tried to break in. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. As usual lately, I want to start by thanking my paid Patreon members, starting with my VIPs, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8, Also Heidi H, Chronic J, Stinky News, EricaOdd, and Tracy Sellars. Your continued support means a whole lot to me. And I would also like to wish Chiamerah Cat a happy belated birthday. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I want to let you know that I'll be coming out with a story for the Patreon within the next day or so be on the lookout for that. I've also been considering changing the beginning of my videos. Now, I know that the Alfred Hitchcock beginning I've done it for years, and I know it's pretty popular. However, it is kind of long, and I've noticed that I do sort of have people dropping out of watching the video before the opening is over. So I'm considering leaving the Alfred Hitchcock Presents logo up and making the meow sound then. And I'll keep the theme song, but maybe I'll play it before the outro. What does everyone think about that? Anyhow, if you like the video, please let me know by hitting the like button, comment, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and hit that bell so you get notifications, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. And now I would like to thank my free Patreon subscribers: Anthony Bowers, Remi, Venikins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, and Evil Black Cat. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.